question says, why don't people live as long as they do? I don't know, which class did that come from? Your class? Anybody want to own up to the question? We're not sure where it came from. But anyway, it was in there. This is the way teens are saying, I'm not going to give you any more information than I have to. But it was a great question. And the reason being is that's, in your Christianity, that's one of those questions that people come on, how can you believe that? How can people live as long as they used to? And the fact is, this morning, there is a scientific side to this question and there's a spiritual side to this question. So I want to have us look at both. Now here's the thing. You bring this up and people will say, okay, what's the deal? And really, there's kind of like 5 major shifts in age if we go back. Before Adam got kicked out of Eden, however, that all came down. We don't know if people would have died at all, but we do know this. From the time of Adam to the flood, the Bible reports that the average age was around 900 years old that people died. Now it would take us like 6,000 years plus back in time, somewhere before 6,000 years. The next shift was after the flood. That flood seemed to have done a lot of major something there. And that takes us to about 4,500 years ago. And it's interesting, Noah lived to 900 plus, and then the age halves. People are now dying, sorry Steve, didn't mean to spit on it, 400 to 500 years, somewhere in that range. And then from that generation into the next, it reports another drop, it halves again. It goes from that 400 down to the 200 year range. That's like in around 4,300 years ago. And then from Abraham to Joshua, now we're getting up to the time, now we have a Hebrew nation, the Jewish nation, and they're in slavery, and they get lost in the wilderness, and then they rebel, and then they reform, and then they, there's all kinds of stuff goes on. Well, between Abraham and Joshua, that takes us up to about 300 years ago, basically 3,000. And the average age now drops to around 140. And by the time of David, the age drops to about 78 years old. And guess what the average age is today? Nobody wants to guess. 70. Cameron knows. He's got it. Okay, new guy's got it. The whole thing is this, is that now when I say the natural age, what I'm saying is, people say, well, people didn't live as long. The average age was less in the past. Well, the only reason, if you play with the numbers, is because a lot of people died in childbirth. People get taken out in wars, diseases, and stuff like that. So when you add them in, the average age goes down. But if you took a guy who lived a normal, fortunate life and lived to old age, 78 years old, basically, since the time of David, for sure, 3,000 years, that age hasn't changed. So one thing, this is where we're going to slip into the scientific side of it. Is that really possible? That normally, and just, looking at it quickly, 900 years, okay, I'll tell you what, that sounds a little far-fetched. Well, let's slip into something for a moment and look at what science is now looking at right now. And to start with this, is that everything, every species, right, every creature has its time. For instance, a fruit fly lives roughly 9 days. That's how long a fruit fly lives. If you're lucky enough to be a mouse, you're all the way up to 2 years. If nothing eats you or steps on you or whatever. If you're an elephant, you're good for about 80 years. And if you're lucky enough to be a Galapagos tortoise, you're good for 200 years. And then people sit in there, that's 78 years. Now, science has only begun asking this question, hey, why do things age at all? When you think of it, we're made of cells, things regenerate. In effect, unless there's something wired in there, things really shouldn't die, really, because we keep regenerating ourselves. So they look at different things, and if we look at nutrition and how healthy you live and everything, you can extend or shorten your life. But I'll tell you what, you can feed a fruit fly whatever you want to feed him, give him the best, protein mix or whatever, have him work out every day, and he's still going to die somewhere around 9 days. With a person, the same thing. You might extend your life and quality of life, but you're still somewhere in, depending on your genetics, you're going to sit in there somewhere around 78 days. So here's what science has come up with so far, is they realize it's not that stuff, but there is a life clock built into every living thing. So if it's not in the food, it's not in the environment, where would you think this life clock might be, this countdown clock might be built into a living thing. Let's go back to how a body is made. You're made out of tiny little building blocks, right? So if you took a look at your skin, for instance, and I've got skin that's going to come up here. See there, okay, obviously it looks like a fingerprint. And if you look at your skin, if we had really, really good eyes or a very good microscope, what we would find is our skin is made up of what? Cells. We are made up, every part of your body is made up of cells stuck together in some form, right? Different kinds of cells. Your skin is one kind of cell, your heart is another type of cell, your brain is another type of cell. So you get all of these cells that make you up. So, and the thing, now I'm going to tell you something that will kind of freak you out. Might even cause you to wet your pants, so brace yourself. Did you know that no person technically is more than 10 years old? Usually you're supposed to look shocked. Okay, that's good. So how can that be? Well, it's this, is that every cell dies, right? It only lasts so long. Whether it's a skin cell, a heart cell, a brain cell, it only lasts so long. So that cell knows it's going to die and is ready to reproduce itself and make another cell just like it. So when it dies, the other cell takes over, right? Well, within 7 to 10 years, depending on the cycle, every cell in your body changes. You are not the same cells as when you were born. Every one of us. And in fact, since it's a cycle of maybe 10 years, technically our bodies are no more than 10 years old as that goes on. So here's where the life clock thing comes in, is the one thing that is consistent is what's in the middle of the cell. Now you guys are all in some form of science, I'm sure. How does the cell know how to reproduce another cell just like it? Aren't you a veterinarian? Aren't you in vet school? It's in the middle of the cell is something, it's a map that tells a cell how to make, Yeah, in the nucleus is DNA, right? Now, you really would have, if somebody would have said deoxyribonucleic acid, I would have been like really impressed. But we'll stick with DNA. So, hey, you know what I did? I went and I made paper DNA. Here it is. See, there's the information on it and everything. And that's basically an animated thing of how DNA works. It takes and replicates the strands. And so those strands go off into the next cell, right? You know, the whole meiosis, mitosis thing going on. And so it has basically a list. This goes here, that goes there, and it makes a list, and the DNA goes in that cell. And eventually, the new cell that's made is going to have to make another cell, so it does the same thing, just like that. It makes this DNA. And in the DNA is where the life clock is. And this is where science starts getting a little bit hazy, because they know the life clock is in here somehow, some way. But they're not quite sure how the countdown works. Here's one way it might work. Now, this is what you guys are going to be part of to start with. Cameron, for right now, you're like a newborn baby, okay? You ready? I'm going to take this whole row, and we're all the same person at different ages. So we'll say Cameron is a baby, and Brandon's 2, and Jonah's 4, just going down the line. So, are you impressed I didn't say Noah again? Yes, that guy. How long has he known me? So, this is the thing. But this is one way this life clock may work, is that every time the DNA reproduces itself, it's kind of tough on it, and it wears it out a little bit. So this is what I want you to do, Cameron. Cameron, you take this, and you just kind of, to your satisfaction, just kind of crumple it up and then open it up and pass it on to Brandon. Okay. Cameron is really hard on his DNA. Now, there it is. It's replicating. So, Brandon, now, you do the same thing. Boy, that's some sad-looking DNA now. Okay. Pass it on. Wear and tear, because you are now reproducing your cells. And there's your DNA clock. And you see, this is one theory, is that the DNA, the clock, is actually how it wears out. And that's it, and it's made to wear out at a certain level. Now, if every one of us in here did just like Cameron, and we round that up to the very, very same level every time we pass it on. This is looking pretty sad. There we go. We could probably figure out how long that paper DNA would last, because it is going to wear out at a specific amount of time. So here they are. This is me. Okay, I'm still getting old.
I just look back in my head trying to make note of two things going on.
I'm going to start with you, Steve. All right, see, this was real nice when it started with Cameron, when Cameron was born. And by the time now, I'm an old guy here in, I'm not going to say because some people will say, well, I'm older than that, so how do I feel? Now I'm an old guy. And so my DNA is starting to look like this. And so, I'm not doing so well anymore. I'm not going to last that much longer. And you could almost calculate it out by the number of crumples that this thing could take. It's one way the clock might work. So here's where I'm getting into the scientific side that actually even science is looking at, is what if it's this way it works, what if I found a way when Cameron was born, he didn't quite crumple it up so badly? Well, then it would last a lot longer, and I would end up being older. And what if we figured out a way in this clock that it didn't age at all? Well, I could go on forever and ever. So the point is that even science says if they could figure out a way to reset this clock, then people could live for ages that we can't even imagine right now. It all comes down to this life clock. Pointing it out for a reason then is that then if that's true, if this clock can be reset, is it surprising then, or is it inconceivable that people did live a lot longer in the past? The only question then becomes is, who reset the clock? And how did they set it, and why did they reset it? Doesn't it make sense if we entertain the idea that there is a creator force in the universe, that creator who designed things could also reset the clock? So then the question becomes, then why would he reset the clock?
Merciful. So we wouldn't constantly be saying.
Yeah, wow, that is a good answer. You're a good teenager.
I wouldn't have said that as a teenager.
Oh, you would say that. Okay. So Katie and Abby will answer that way in a few years. Okay. But the bottom line is that if you look at every time we went through these, basically there's 4 dramatic shifts, and if we look at 5 shifts in lifespan according to Scripture, every one of them happened at a particular event, if we might say. The first big one, why people died at all, with Adam up to Noah, was, well, we betrayed God. That's the bottom line. Whether you believe in trees and apples, that's incidental. The bottom line is God had set up a relationship, and we betrayed the relationship as a race. And all of a sudden, there it is. There is the first lifespan, if you will. Then if we had time, we looked that up until the time of Noah. It says people got very, very evil. People distanced themselves from God, so much so that God intercedes. And whether we talk about whether it was the flood in the Mesopotamian basin or whether it was a worldwide flood, for which there's fossils and all of that, if we want to go that way. Bottom line is, God said we distanced ourselves so far he had to do a do-over. He had to kind of wake up and start again. Then after that, there was yet another event, just shortly after that. Let's see, I haven't given away any free donuts yet. What would be the next event God stepped in after the flood? What was the next big thing? Hold on, do you know? Yeah.
The Tower of Babel.
Okay, you get a free donut, and you get to eat it in front of these guys. So there you go. See, you're allowed to choose. If you look at every time the lifespan changes, there was a major event where people distanced themselves from God. Now, if God is the source, I wanted to try a little illustration here with you. I brought my heater in from my office because sometimes my office gets really cold. But that's beside the point. Now let's just say, I'm going to try a simple experiment. I would like you guys, it's plastic so it doesn't even get that hot. Just a very simple experiment. You guys, bring your hands right to the thing. What do you feel now? Okay. Now if you keep your hand there for a second. And until there's tears and blisters, Okay, now slowly pull your hand back about a foot away. Now what do you experience? Well, and less heat, for sure, right? Okay, here's what I'm getting at. Imagine if instead of warmth, this was God. Basically, the warmth was actually life. And God is more than the source of life. He is life. If you're close, there's lots of life. If you distance yourself, there's less life, just like this heat. And that in kind of a nutshell, explains lifespan, but the whole principle goes even further than this, is because anytime we distance ourselves from God, there is less life. There is, in effect, death starts becoming, darkness starts becoming part of it. What other things besides physical life can die in a person? Anything? Huh? Mental? Okay. Emotional? What else? What other things can die in a person's life besides emotions, conscience can die? What else can die? Hope can die. Belief can die. This is where it becomes very important because, right now, we can all live the best lives we want, but we're still probably get that 78, give or take so many years, and whatever's in our genetics. However, there's a lot of other things that can die in your life. Innocence is another one that can die. Once, in some respects, in the physical sense, once the innocence is gone, it's gone. You don't get it back. All of these things can die. And so the point is, don't make the distance. Don't put a distance between you and God, because history proves that it doesn't work very well. Just as surely as you guys had your hand next to the warmth, if you pull back from God, the warmth is going to disappear. The life is going to disappear. So we can count on it. It's just, there can be no other option if you distance yourself from life.